Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to the special series of Saturn moving into the sign of Sagittarius. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. Saturn moving into the sign of Sagittarius will begin at the very end of 2014. And other than the summer of 2015, between June and September, when he retrogrades back into the sign of Scorpio, Saturn will pretty much be in the sign of Sagittarius for the better part of the next 3 years, right to the very end of December of 2017. So wherever Saturn goes, individually, yes, we're learning some of our most important lessons there. We feel called to pay attention to a new area, to work and gain self-respect in that particular area of life. And that's what the horoscopes are about. This particular video looks at Saturn moving into the sign of Sagittarius for us as a collective. So Saturn will be moving into a sign that has to do with politics, it has to do with higher education, and it has to do with immigration. It has to do with foreign travel as well. And all of these are going to be areas that get our attention. And I actually see usually when Saturn is about to approach a new sign, usually you start hearing things right about then. So right around the time that I'm recording this, in the late part of Saturn in Scorpio, we should collectively be hearing things. I certainly am seeing a lot of things as well. While Saturn moves into the sign of, or moves through the sign of Sagittarius, we'll be speaking with Jupiter and Neptune, first off, in conversations that are called squares. So these are conversations of tension, and these are conversations that tend to indicate that we are motivated to make changes, usually by identifying what isn't working. And then in 2016, in the later part of the transit, we are going to have Saturn speaking in supreme harmony with Neptune. So that's all happening just in time. We'll be building towards that just in time for the US elections and in time for the next president to enter into US politics as well. So I want to start off by saying when I see these types of conversations with Saturn and Neptune, Saturn and Jupiter, there's a couple of ways that I look at this. Now, wherever Saturn goes, it becomes about sort of holding down the fort, if you will. It's not the best time or the easiest time to make really big changes because Saturn is also tradition. So it's about holding on to the way things are, and things tend to get a little more strict. Right now, as I'm recording this, we've got a lot of attention being paid to the Ebola virus, and is it going to spread, is it not? Well, to me, as I look at Saturn speaking with Jupiter, speaking with Neptune, that is a very great sign about getting serious about communicable diseases and actually putting things into place, including, I gotta say, travel restrictions, putting things into place that help to contain disease and help to actually bring about like tangible solutions, actual cures and stuff. We're motivated to make those changes, and we're motivated to put in the work to make that happen. There's another element to this as well, of course. As I said, travel restrictions, one of the first things we think about with that is just moving around might get a little bit more, not necessarily challenging, but I think of this more as just very recently, for example, the Canadian government announced some big changes really to immigration laws, making it a lot harder for people to gain citizenship. And this is the type of thing I think we're going to be seeing a lot of across the board in a lot of different nations as well, especially those nations that are considered to have very powerful passports and the type of passports that give you more access to more of the world. And so where it is that people already have those types of passports, we are going to find there's going to be more move, more call to travel. More of us are going to be inspired to do that, are going to be wanting to do that. So we can expect to see new initiatives that encourage people. For example, I know a lot of people, at least in Canada, right out of university would go and teach English in a foreign country. Well, those types of programs are going to become a lot more heavily marketed, if you will. They're going to be a lot of people who are going to want to attract other people, those with already strong passports, to spend some time in foreign countries. Those people, who already are sort of seeking immigration in these places, as I said, I think that immigration in general, citizenship in general, is going to become a bit of a more complicated process, pretty much across the board, but especially those places where a lot of people do want to immigrate to and do want to go to. And so that doesn't mean, and I'm very much of the belief that ultimately Saturn, wherever Saturn goes, you do get what you need. Absolutely. So if you are engaged in some sort of process where you want to gain some sort of immigration, just know that yes, it might be a little bit more complicated. It might be a little bit more waiting, which is something that Saturn really likes to honor time. So there might be a little bit more waiting involved. But for all that, I do think that the possibility, the promise, and the actualization is certainly there. So if you're meant to be somewhere, you will be there. And I think that sometimes, and especially considering that Saturn will be speaking in supreme harmony with Uranus, I mean, this is just, out of the blue after years of trying or years of wanting, out of the blue, just getting really positive answers, seeing that process just really go through an acceleration. And so I know that there's been some talk in the US as well about dream kids, if you will. So kids who've been seeking immigration in the U.S. If there's been any sort of stops and stalls in that, I don't pay that much attention to the news these days. But if there have been any stalls in that, we should find a program like that. Certainly, there should be some kind of really great progress in that area in 2016 and 2017 as well. As I said, politics is also a point of focus with Saturn moving through the sign of Sagittarius, and there is sort of a lot of political rhetoric that is going to be asked to put into check. And so this, to me, and this is something I'm very encouraged by, is Saturn moving through the sign of Sagittarius, speaking with Jupiter, speaking with Neptune, is about us getting serious about sort of, not necessarily, I don't want to say extremism, but I want to say like getting carried away on sort of these, religious waves and the consequences it can actually have, and what it is collectively that we want to do to bring a sense of balance, to have a sense of understanding that ultimately we live in a really diverse world. And that means we got to get along. And that means that in some things, in more things than not, truth is relative. And so where is it that we need to put into check things that are like sort of political rhetoric running wild, religious rhetoric running wild? All of that is going to be coming into focus with this particular transit. And so I do think that there's going to be some more solid progress. So this isn't going to be so much about necessarily force, if you will. More that this is going to be, we are going to be seeing people who are talking about and wanting to do something about what is happening in terms of why are people being drawn to really sort of extreme ways of looking at the world, extreme political points of views, extreme religious points of views. Why is that, and what healing needs to take place on that level? So we should see some sort of collective discussion around that as well. Sagittarius is also the sign of education as well. And so as the sign of education, what's really interesting to me here is I've heard some people say that people are going to be saying that education, formal education, is not really worth the investment. I, for one, am not of that belief, because I know how much I've been blessed by my journey through higher education. And I encourage absolutely anyone and everyone, if you have the opportunity to do that. Just personally, it's blessed me so much. But as a collective, I think that Saturn moving through the sign of Sagittarius, and especially when Saturn starts speaking with Uranus, this is a lot more of us looking at accessibility. Saturn likes to hold things together. Saturn likes to ensure the tradition. And institutions of higher learning have these very established modes of tradition, but also can be quite elitist as well. So if you think back to what was happening in the late 80s, the last time that Saturn moved through this part of the sky, well, what happened right around this time? There was a discussion around the elitism of education, which eventually led to, towards the end of this transit, it led to education becoming more accessible to people where it wasn't before. And so before, whereas a very small percentage of people actually were able to go to university, by the time we ended the 80s and entered the 90s, we saw lots of programs kick into place around the world. I know particularly in Canada as well, a lot of programs kicked into place that allowed education to become a lot more accessible in a lot of different ways. And so just at the high school level, it became more accessible to access types of education that prepare you for university. And once people were in university, it became a lot more able to access government grants and funding and things like that, because there was a sort of a collective recognition that there is a benefit to be gained when a population is educated. And so Saturn likes to keep things together. Saturn speaking to Uranus is like a breakthrough, is the next wave. And so I do think that we can expect to see education get a lot more accessible, sort of go on to the next level. I know, and again, I don't pay attention to news that much, but I know that I have been hearing about how on the high school level in the United States, maybe in just some parts of the United States, very early on, students are sort of relegated to, okay, these are the students who are going to be prepared for university. These are the students who maybe will be able to go to college. These are the ones who need a trade. And so that model is going to be called into question, I do think. And we're going to be looking at how it is that, what are the benefits of higher education, and how it is that people who actually would be really great at accessing higher education maybe don't have that opportunity, and what it is that we can do to ensure that they do have that opportunity. So I do see breakthroughs and more accessibility happening in that regard as well. I did promise to talk about the US elections, and what I wanted to say was in 2008, Saturn was in opposition to Uranus right around the time of the US elections. And whenever these two planets talk, Saturn is tradition. It's the way that things are done. Uranus is the next wave. It's the future. And it's also strongly connected to human rights and equality as well. So we see, especially in the United States, we do see when Uranus and Saturn speak, there tends to be a breakthrough, and that breakthrough is, yes, it can be on the level of, for women, it can be progress for a level of women and other groups, but mostly, in my opinion, as I look at the sky, I do think that this tends to represent progress on a level of race and race relations and what we think is possible. And so in the 60s, when we had Uranus and Saturn across from each other, we had the Voting Rights Act and all kinds of things put into place to ensure equality, the end of segregation as well. With the 2008 election, with this particular configuration, we had the election of a black president. And so as I look at that, and I know, like, again, politics aside, I'm not saying anything about that because I don't really know enough about it, but with that aside, I do remember in 2008, it's been talked about a lot, there was this feeling that anything is possible. That was sort of a catchphrase and an energy that we saw very strongly towards the end of 2008 and 2009 as well, as this configuration was playing out. And so this time, what we have happening in 2016 and 17 is Saturn speaking with Uranus in supreme harmony in a type of conversation called a trine. Now, I actually see this conversation as representing another breakthrough, yes. But because it's a trine, it seems like it's almost a natural progression. It's not going to seem like this, huge kind of step. It's not going to seem culturally, at least, like a huge wow. But it is going to feel like, oh, wow, okay, we really are moving into the future. We really are moving into a different understanding of what it means to be us. And this is collectively as well. And we're going to see this across the board. Now, this is my personal call with this, okay? I do think as I look at this, and I've, considered this, and I've talked about this with different astrologers, could it be a woman or not? The nodes are going to be in feminine signs, and that can speak to a woman being elected. But I do think, given the symbols, given that both of these planets, Saturn and Uranus, are going to be in fire signs, I do think that we are going to see at very high levels of office, we are going to see in the United States people of Hispanic descent. That's my call. Okay, as far as gender and stuff goes, again, because these are very masculine signs, these are fire signs, It may be a woman, but I think very, very likely the main thing that we are going to see is either on the presidential level or the vice presidential level. We are going to see the first Hispanic sort of in office. So that's my call for the election. Anyway, I'm sure I'll be asked, and I'm sure I'll refer people to this video a little bit more in that regard. But we can expect 2016 and 17 to see some really lovely breakthroughs take place in terms of our understanding of what we can do, of what is possible, of what is accessible to us. So education is going to become more accessible. More people are going to find themselves able to travel a lot more freely and encouraged to do so. Even with in the beginning of this transit, even though in the beginning of this transit there may be these sort of restrictions that seem really big, ultimately it is going to lead to Saturn speaking to Uranus, which is going to break the world wide open, which is just going to allow more of us to travel, more of us to be wherever it is that we feel inspired to be. And I do think also that ultimately this is about redefining who we are at our very essence. And ultimately, you know, I'm very much of the belief that every single thing that happens collectively and individually as part of the mystery is about moving us towards greater love and greater wisdom. Now, what does that mean? To me, the way I understand that is that there is an energy that you can call love, that you can call wisdom, that you can call God, that you can call creation. And I do think that a big part of what we're meant to do as humans is to further embody that energy more and more, and to recognize that in others and in more people than before. And I do think the fact that we've seen such huge leaps in equality, especially since the discovery of Uranus in the late 18th century, I do think that this represents a major progress, especially this conversation that's taking place in terms of a more fuller recognition of what each of us is capable of doing and the different ways in which each of us can come to embody that light that each of us individually is meant to shine as part of the larger collective and part of the larger whole as well. I do think it is going to be an incredible transit. Don't let any challenges and stuff at the beginning fool you, as Saturn is speaking to Jupiter and speaking to Neptune. Don't let that fool you. As I said, there may be some travel restrictions that come up in the beginning. That will pass. It won't last long. And this energy will begin to be channeled into a deeper examination of how we got where we are. Where is it that we're getting carried away, and how we can bring ourselves back into check. And ultimately, it's going to lead to some really lovely breakthroughs where so much more becomes possible to so many more of us. Now, please stay tuned. You will see also right now the horoscope and how this particular transit is speaking to you in your sign is coming up and is also posted on my website, nadiyashah.com, and my YouTube channel. It'll be a great transit. Enjoy, and thank you so much for being here.